And welcome to Professor Michael Welch.com. In this episode, we are going to introduce an amazing course titled Prisons and Prisoners. And along the way, we're going to learn about various carceral institutions in the U.S. and elsewhere. And we're going to learn about research in those institutions. We're also going to learn about some theory about those institutions. But before we get to all those details in this course, Prisons and Prisoners, I want to use my website, ProfessorMichaelWelch.com, as a vehicle to invite you into this world of exploring penal institutions. So, easy to find, ProfessorMichaelWelch.com, right there. And we call that the splash page, and boom, greetings. Thank you for taking time to visit ProfessorMichaelWelch.com. By way of introduction, I'm a professor in the criminal justice program at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, in the U.S. of A, specializing in criminology, state crime, and human rights. For years, I have examined racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities in the criminal justice system, especially as they have emerged in the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on undocumented immigrants, and more recently, the war on terror. Those developments are explored in several journal articles and books, in particular Crimes of Power and States of Impunity, the U.S. Response to Terror, Scapegoats of September 11th, Hate Crimes and State Crimes in the War on Terror, Ironies of Imprisonment, Detained, Immigration Laws in the Expanding INS Jail Complex. My work more recently has taken a cultural turn with the book Escape to Prison, Penal Tourism and the Pull of Punishment. And currently I'm finishing a book titled The Bastille Effect, Sites and Symbols of Political Imprisonment. And in this website, we can explore, investigate, inspect these various avenues of research, publishing, etc., etc. And with that, let's go to scholarly activities that'll give you an idea of what I do. How's that? Yeah, college teaching. Currently at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, New Jersey, USA. These are the courses that I teach, but I'm going to focus primarily on prisons and prisoners, since this is a course that I have been developing for decades. I've been teaching it at Rutgers University since 1993. Before that, I was teaching at St. John's University in Queens, New York, and I was teaching these courses, correctional institutions primarily, as well as the sociology of prisons. So this has been part of my persona, part of my research and consciousness, going back to the 1980s. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. While I was teaching at St. John's University in the sociology department, sociology and anthropology, let's be fair about that, okay? Sociologists always want to lead off the anthropologists. We ought not do that. When I was teaching at St. John's University in New York, the administration and the leadership of sociology was quite interested in reaching out to prisoners and allowing them to engage in scholarly activity in the form of an educational program. And so once a week, on a Monday night, I would make the trip over to Staten Island, New York, to spend the evening at Arthur Kill Correctional Facility. And there I was teaching this course, at the time known as Sociology of Prisons, but I was also teaching a course on social problems. So I mention that because it was a bit of a, perhaps ironic, that I was teaching a course on sociology of prisons inside a prison to prisoners. And at the time, Arthur Kill Correctional Facility was what they call a walk-down institution, meaning that these prisoners had been incarcerated at a higher level of security, a maximum security prison, places like Attica, and they were walking down. They were now in a medium security institution, and after a period of incarceration at that level, they would then go to a minimum security level and then to the community. I mention that because there are various levels of security, and very often what we see in the field of incarceration is the phenomenon of over-incarceration. That is that prisoners are placed in an institution that has a higher security level than what is warranted. And this has contributed to a major problem, not only in mass incarceration, but again, the concept being over-incarceration. We're going to talk about that in this course on prisons and prisoners, but I want to point it out there because I've seen it in my own professional work. But this course, Sociology of Prisons, or Sociology of Corrections, was actually developed when I was a PhD student at the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas. And I want to mention that at this stage because this is really where I began to find some inspiration as to what I wanted to do as a scholar, as a researcher. I was particularly interested in social institutions at a broader level, but I was also more interested in penal institutions and correctional institutions at a more micro level. So that's a brief overview of how this course came to be, at least the way I teach it. But let me also point to education, because very often my students ask, how in the heck did you wind up teaching at Rutgers University? What was your pathway? What were the things you did when you were younger? What were the opportunities that you had, and what were the opportunities that you pursued? Because very often those of us, when we're in our early 20s, are still trying to figure out what we're going to do to make a living, and more importantly, what we're going to do to make a particular contribution to our field and hopefully serve society. So let's go back to 1978, very briefly. That's when I left the Catholic seminary. I then made my way to another Catholic university, Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, also known as St. Benedict's. We're very fond of St. Benedict's and very fond of St. Scholastica, which was the women's college at the time, and those two colleges combined to form Benedictine College, which is still very much up and running in Atchison, Kansas, about an hour outside of Kansas City. And when I finished my degree in psychology, the minor in sociology, I was really interested in working in psychology and earned a master's degree in counseling psychology at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And it was there that I emphasized in individual therapy, crisis intervention, diagnostic screening, and psychometry. Along the way, psychopathology, abnormal psychology. It was during this time that I was also working in a psychiatric institution. And I began to realize that all the books that we read when we were undergraduate students as well as graduate students were just scratching the surface of this larger phenomenon of institutionalization. And institutionalization, in more historical terms, can be traced to the 1820s and 1830s in the United States, as well as Europe, England in particular, when civic leaders began recognizing larger social problems of what they were calling insanity back then, we'll call mental health now, crime, poverty, so on and so forth, and the idea that you could build institutions with bricks and mortar and then place these individuals who were troubled inside these institutions for a period of time. I mention that here because this is where I want to begin a more refined narrative as to what I do and why I do it. So we're going to take a brief pause. I'm going to get a cup of coffee, and when we come back, I want to pick up with this larger phenomenon of institutionalization and how it then has contoured the use of incarceration in U.S. society.